Yeah, it's good, man. Good, good. So we are live for episode number 7 of the MMA Ratings Podcast. Today is April 10th, 2016, and I am Raphael Garcia, and I'm back again with Schwan Humes talking about the world of mixed martial arts. How are you doing this week or this Wednesday there, Schwan?
Oh, I'm great, man. Glad to be back. Glad to be back on the show.
So, we're always glad to have you, especially, this week. We have a quiet week of MMA. No fights scheduled this weekend. I think this is the first weekend this is like 8 or something like that, something ridiculous where we haven't had any fights scheduled. So still have some things to talk about, though, because the sport does not sleep. Every day we got something else to look forward to. So we're going to jump right into some of the news stories that came out of this week, starting first with Tyron Woodley. We talked a lot about him last show after he stopped Robbie Lawler in the first round of their UFC 201 main event. So now we're looking at some of the fallout. He's had some pretty interesting comments where he wants to have more say in who he fights next. He's brought up names such as Nick Diaz or George St. Pierre, and he calls it what you would like to term money fights, looking at he's trying to make the most amount of money possible. I can't really blame him for that. He's a professional fighter, and that's the meaning of the word professional or, prize fighting. They're there to make the biggest prize possible for themselves. But he's also been hit with a lot of backlash for that. So what are your thoughts about that, Schwan? Should he be forced to face Stephen Thompson next, or do you get why he's trying to be more analytical in who he decides to fight?
Well, most people, to be honest, Tyron Woodley doesn't have a lot of fans. I mean, like legitimate, strong fan base, because if he did, no one would be shocked by what he's saying right now. It's clear to me that people don't read his interviews, don't pay attention to what he says on TV or in print or on websites, because this is what he's been about from day one. He's never been a guy who's just here for the experience. He's routinely made it known that this is a short-term career. This doesn't have any benefits. This doesn't have any insurance. I have to pay for my wife. I have to pay for a house. I have to pay for my kids with this. I'm sure he loves the sports. He loves the competition, but this is a bottom line business to him, and he's always treated it as such. So this is no shock to me at all. I don't blame him for what he's doing. There's a lot of fighters who will say he's ducking people. He needs to fight me. That's the right thing to do. He shouldn't be trying to get money fights. He should fight me and then get to the money fights. But a lot of those fighters, in all actuality, aren't being honest with the fans or themselves. You see, fighters like to pick and choose when they're going to be warriors and when they're going to be businessmen. The same guy who says, I'll fight anyone, anywhere, 2 weeks later is going to say, well, I can't fight him. He's ranked 7 spots below me, and it's not a good payday, and it's not good exposure, and it's on an undercard, or it's on a prelim, or it's on Fight Pass, and I don't want to do it. But last time I checked, warriors and soldiers, they fight whenever they have to. They don't fight. They don't pick their spots, and they don't pick when and where they're going to do it. They just do their job. And fighters aren't warriors. They're not soldiers. They're businessmen in an athletic competition. And Tyron Woodley is the only guy who's one of the few guys, King Mo's another guy, who's honest enough to admit the connection between what they're doing. And that's all he's doing. He's just being honest. He's just being honest. And I have nothing wrong with it. And I think he's going to play his hand to the full extent of his abilities, because that's what he did to get to the title fight. He didn't fight. He sat on the sidelines. He saved his money, sat on the sidelines, and waited for an opportunity to come, and he took full advantage of it. And that's what he's going to continue to do. Now, the UFC can force him to make the fight, but even if they do, guess what? That works in Woodley's favor too, because now more people are interested in seeing him fight Thompson, because they're going to assume that he was, in my air quotations, ducking Stephen Thompson. So that makes the fight more profitable, and it gets more word out there, because now people who didn't even know him, casuals, are going to be like, well, this guy just killed Robbie Lawler, and now he's ducking this karate guy? Let me find out what that's about. So either way, he's going to get more money than he expected. It's just he's willing to be honest and open about where he stands and why he's doing this. And a lot of fighters won't. They put on an act for the fans. And you and I are smart enough to know that it is an act. They're not out there. It's not life or death. They wouldn't do it for free. That's why they have contracts. That's why they have managers. That's why they beg for bonuses after fights. It's a business. And the guys who last the longest, make the most money, and often have the most success, treat it as such. Even GSP said, it's a business. You treat it as such, and you'll perform better. You'll have more branding, and you'll have more opportunities. You can't just treat it like it's a street fight, because it's not. It's a business. And Tyron Woodley's just being open about that.
It's interesting that you brought up the point that he has been saying this for a long time, because that's exactly right. He has been very calculated with every fight that he has tried to take. And, a lot of people are giving him a hard time for not being active since last January. But remember, he had that fight planned and booked with Johnny Hendricks, but Hendricks couldn't make weight. So that's not on him. So I totally agree with you when it comes down to what he's been saying for so long. And the thing is that if this is how more fighters should kind of treat their career. If he made $340,000, which was disclosed. We still don't know what he got from Reebok or other discretionary pay, and that's a pretty big payday for any fighter at this time. But more fighters should be treating their career the way Tyron does, especially if you're in the top tier, top 5 of a weight class. You just can't be jumping in there, taking a fight against anyone, pissing away your opportunities. While it doesn't happen a lot, we've seen guys get upset before, and we've seen what that has done to their career. The UFC has a hard time remembering favors when it comes from their fighters, and taking fights on short notice or taking bad matchups may not be the best way to go. We've seen that. We've seen a negative aspect of that go down in the past. So I don't blame Tyron Woodley for what he did. And personally, I think more guys should take their career the same way.
Let me say one more thing, a couple more things, actually. I apologize for interrupting you. The UFC doesn't see a fighter taking a fight on short notice or taking on a short notice opponent if you're the guy who didn't fall out. They don't see that as a favor. Dana White said this in an interview before. He goes, you're not doing me a favor. You're not saving the card. The card's going to happen regardless. All you're doing is giving yourself yet another opportunity to get paid and yet another opportunity to move up in the ranking or maintain your ranking. He doesn't look at it as a favor. He doesn't think you're doing him any favors. He thinks you're doing your job as a fighter, fighting. And as a promoter, that's what his job is. His loyalty isn't to the fighters. And no promoter's loyalty ever is to the fighters. It's to the promotion. It's to the sport. That happens in boxing. It happens in MMA. The problem with all these fighters, and I talk to a lot of fighters, like, side note, a lot of people who have podcasts, you don't find them in MMA. They don't go to MMA gyms. They don't go to boxing gyms. They maybe go to jiu-jitsu gyms, but that's not filled with a lot of fighters all the time. I go to MMA gyms. Like, people see me in the gyms. I hold a show. Somebody's like, hey, I heard your show. Somebody I might be about to spar or talk to. So it's a little bit different tone. These guys get hung up on the idea that the UFC is the Super Bowl of sports. It's the MMA version of the Super Bowl. It's like the NBA Finals of MMA. They get hung up on the idea of fighting the best and being in the biggest organization, and people saying, hey, you're a UFC fighter. I'm not a fighter, so you can ignore my opinion as far as that goes, but I'm just going to state it in anyways. If I have a family or I have a wife or I have kids, I don't have the luxury of caring about being with the UFC. Those letters don't mean anything. The only letters that matter to me are what's on my check, along with the numbers behind it. And a lot of guys aren't like that. They're hung up on the idea of being in the UFC. Then when they don't make their money, or they take a short notice fight and get cut, or they get overmatched, then get blown out, after the fact, that's when they start saying, well, the UFC didn't treat me right. They didn't give me enough opportunities. They gave me short notice fights. You didn't have to take them. Oh, I had a title shot coming to me, but I saved a card by fighting on it, and the UFC didn't do me any favors. You didn't have to take that fight. It's a business. If the UFC wants to give you a short notice fight, who cares if Dana White talks trash about you? Because if you get knocked out in one round, he talks trash about you. If you get outclassed, he's going to say you got outclassed. He's going to say you got beat up. He's going to say you got embarrassed and you didn't even belong in the same cage as this guy. Don't get hung up on Dana White's words and the words of the owners. That doesn't matter. What matters is the bottom line results, your ranking, your win streaks, and how much you are getting paid. That's the stuff that's going to allow you to take care of yourself, take care of your health, and take care of your children, and take care of your wife if you have one, or husband, because there are female fighters, so maybe their husbands or boyfriends or their kids, whoever. People get too hung up on this idea of being in the UFC. The UFC will not be paying your bills. They will not be giving you a retirement fund. They don't give you a severance package. All they do is give you a platform to perform on. And if you don't perform the way they like, they will cut you. And if you perform very well, but you ask for more money, they'll hold you over for a year until your contract gets bought out or passes, or they'll just sit you on the bench. And I don't understand how fighters routinely ignore this. Tyron Woodley understands it's a short-term career, and he's got to maximize whatever opportunities he gets. The next fight might be his last. He could get seriously injured and never fight again. It better be his biggest payday. He better have something set up where he can go into movies or other business ventures. That's how he got in this position. He doesn't depend solely on fighting. He does movies. He does extra work. He does all sorts of things so he could sit out on the sidelines, not need money to pay his bills and take care of his family, and just wait for things to fall into place. Basically, Tyron Woodley did what all our parents tell us to do in real life. Be prepared, look ahead, and be a professional. Be ready to do your job when they call your name. Put yourself in position to avoid as much drama as possible and get to where you want to get. What did he do? He came in on weight. Johnny Hendricks didn't make it. So Johnny Hendricks not being a professional cost him. It put Tyron Woodley in a good position. He had his money together, so he didn't have to take any short-term fights or risk his ranking. And he sat back and he watched everybody else butcher and murder each other until his opportunity to come out on top came. And he came in and he took full advantage of it. Because if he would have lost that fight, it would have been over for him. They had no love lost for him. But he played his cards right. He got the win. Now he's in the driver's position. And like I said, whether they get him a name fight or they force him to fight Thompson, now the fight is more interesting and more personal because it looks like he ducked Thompson. He's not ducking Thompson. He just doesn't want to fight a top-ranked killer for average money. He wants to get as much money as he can. And how do you do that? You drum up interest. How has he already drummed up interest? How many interviews and articles have been done about him ducking Thompson now? Tons of them. How many interviews and articles about his approach to the game? How many fans now hate Tyron Woodley because he's a money fighter? He's brought all sorts of attention because of this. It's a smart play. It's a smart play, and I applaud him for it.
So I'm going to push back on you. You said something. You said a lot there, and we're going to talk. We're going to focus more on Tyron Woodley. But you said that jiu-jitsu gyms aren't MMA gyms, and they don't have a lot of top fighters. I'm going to disagree with you there, just because I can name a lot of fighters who are based out of jiu-jitsu gyms. But that's another conversation for a whole nother day. But
my apologies for that disrespect.
No. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to apologize. We're always back and forth. But as always, when it comes to Tyron, like I'm not mad at him for what he's doing right now. I think he is doing what is best for him. I think I remember reading somewhere after this fight. I don't know if you saw his piece about why he didn't promote UFC 201 too hard, where he's talking about all the work that he does for himself. Where he's booked like 3 movies since winning the title. I think he just got a part in like Fast 8 too, which is going to be huge. So there's so many different opportunities that he's booked for himself. That in all reality, man, he shouldn't be worried about doing what the fans want him to see or what they think he should do next. He needs to be looking out for himself, and I think that that's exactly what he's doing by picking and choosing what fight he wants next. I mean, Conor McGregor's done it. He's done it for as long as he possibly could. I mean, he's picked and he's selected the fights that he's wanted to fight based on his bank account, and no one can blame him for that. I mean, he was the first fighter to make $1 million payday simply because he picked the fights that he wanted to pick. So, I mean, you can't praise Conor for doing the same thing and then say then have negative things to say about Woodley. Yes, McGregor was more active over the last year or so, but he's dealt with an injury first and foremost, and then he's also dealt with people pulling out of fights as well. So that's not his problem. That's not his issue to remedy. That's on the UFC to find reliable opponents for him. So again, like I said, I'm not opposed to what he's doing right now. I hope he gets a fight against Diaz or GSP next. I would like to see him fight Thompson as well too. But I'm not going to be mad at him for what he's doing simply because you can't be mad at Conor McGregor for doing the same thing.
It's his life. If Tyron hit me up on Twitter and said, "Hey, I don't think you should take your job. You should go find another one that lets you have 3 days off during the week," I don't care what Tyron Woodley says. He's not paying for my bills. He's not taking care of me. I got to do what's best for me and my situation, my family, not what Tyron Woodley thinks. So I don't expect him to care about what fans think because they know fans quitting their job or not following their dream because he said, oh, you're going to fail at it. They're still going to do it. They're going to say, who's he? He's not in charge of my life. So he's doing what the rest of us would do, but we hold athletes and combatants to a higher level than we hold ourselves. We expect them to take chances we wouldn't take. We expect them to put their families at risk when we would never do the same thing. Now, Tyron Woodley is one of those guys selling that warrior shtick that all those guys sell, then I would hold him accountable. But he's never been that guy. It's always been about business. Competition, yes, but it's a business because I have people to depend on and I have a life I want for myself. So I can never fault him because he's been consistent in that. Him, guys like King Mo, guys like GSP, even Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather. I'm about the money. Competition is great. I need to take care of myself and my kids when this is all over.
And I definitely agree with you there. This is something that you see across all sports where fans tend to have an attitude of ownership, for lack of a better term, where they get mad at Kevin Durant for leaving Oklahoma State, or they get mad at LeBron for leaving Cleveland, or they get mad at LeBron for leaving Miami. You know, we see this in all sports. It's unfortunate, but it's that ownership type nature that some fans tend to take. So let's keep the conversation there, and let's talk about who he should fight next. Out of Thompson, Diaz, or St. Pierre, how would you see any of those fights going? If you were to ask me, I think he goes 1 for 3 out of those 3 fights. I think he can beat Diaz, but St. Pierre and Thompson will probably give him the business.
The problem with St. Pierre is, like, if St. Pierre was in his prime, I'd go with it. Woodley's just so fast. He's so explosive. And, yeah, if you can get past the first round and a half, you can really put it on him. You can really outwork him. We've seen it happen before. But GSP isn't the athlete he used to be. He's got all the seasoning. He knows all the skills, but he hasn't fought in a while. And I don't know where he's at as far as his competition level or his reactions and his timing. And Woodley is just fast. That first step explosion, if he lands like that on GSP, it's a wrap. I'm sorry. I don't see GSP taking his shot and coming back. He's a more explosive and dynamic. He's just as powerful as Johnny Hendrick, but more explosive and dynamic. He can hit you with something you can't see. Usually you saw Hendrick's shots coming to a degree. You don't see Woodley's shots coming. Now, if GSP gets past that first round and a half, 2 rounds, okay, then we're talking about a whole different thing because, as we stated before, Woodley's his output falls off, and as a result, his defense, his spacing, and his cage awareness falls off. If he gets past that first round and a half, it's 50-50 GSP. The Thompson fight, I'd probably have to say I take Thompson over him, just because of Thompson's footwork and his angling and his attention to defense. I think he easily gets past the first couple rounds and can extend Woodley. I mean, Woodley's gonna do the same thing everybody tries to do against Thompson: take him down, force him to the fence, land big shots, wear him down, rough him up, be physical with him. Woodley's not gonna strike with him in range. I know that for a fact. That ain't happening. He's not standing off in the middle of the cage and striking with Stephen Thompson in range. I don't care what he says about his striking. I don't care about his athleticism. I will guarantee you that will not happen, and if it does, Woodley will get knocked out inside of a round. Guaranteed. Not happening. Diaz, it's just a bad matchup. His wrestling, he should be able to control him. And win a clear decision. Once again, though, if he tires, if he fades, guys who get tired and guys who fade, like really drop off as far as their work rate and their explosiveness, those guys always lose the Diaz brothers. You can't drop off. You got to take him down and control him for 5 rounds. GSP got tired, but he didn't fall off a cliff. And from what I've seen with Woodley, every time he gets tired, it's not a little tired. He literally walks to the edge of a cliff, his conditioning is at the edge of a cliff at the top, and then by the second round, into the second round, he just walked off the cliff and hit the ground. That's usually how his stamina and his activity goes. So if he's learned to control himself and measure himself, then he can beat Diaz and GSP. If he goes out with that first round, gotta finish explosive nonsense that he does, which works sometimes, but if it doesn't work, I would think Diaz and GSP could beat him over 5, but that's assuming that he doesn't either finish him in the first 2 rounds or hit him with something so damaging that they can't recover from it. And in the case of GSP, who had a lot of wear and tear, a lot of fights, a lot in training camps, I don't think it takes much. It didn't take much to hurt him or rock him before. I've seen lesser punchers knock him out and have him stumbling. So if those guys can do it, a Woodley in his prime, he lands clean on GSP. At least in the first round and a half, it's over, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can agree with that analysis there. I think that he has a tougher fight against Thompson and GSP. I think that the Thompson fight probably looks a lot similar to what it did against Rory McDonald at UFC 171. And then yeah, you're right. GSP I think he's 34. I'm not gonna count his fight. I think that what he may lose in natural athleticism that he's always had, his fight IQ will be there. And I'm not going to discount his athleticism either, because I had the opportunity to see him do some training at this point since his career has been over, and it doesn't look like it's much of a slowdown there to me. So I think that would be a compelling fight as well. And same thing with Diaz. I'll agree with you there. The longer that fight goes, the more it fits Diaz's MO, and to be able to overwhelm people, like rolling downhill. Yeah. So I think it's three very tough fights for Woodley, regardless of who he picks. But
before we move on, I want to clarify. I'm a big GSP fan, and if we're talking about skills, strategy, awareness, and ability to adjust, him and Woodley don't even belong in the same book. Not the same sentence. They don't belong in the same book, in the same school, in the same city. It's not even close. The gap between those guys, as you've seen GSP evolve and progress. Woodley's not at that level. He hasn't shown me he's at that level. He may be, but I haven't seen it yet. So I'm not insulting GSP. I'm just going with the time-honored concept that as you age, you don't become more dynamic. You just maintain and hold on to what you have. And as you get older, you're not able to perform at those high levels for 5 rounds. It's in spots. It becomes spots, so you have to pick your spots. If he can get past that initial rough patch, yeah, it's a problem. But getting past that first round against Tyron Woodley has elite-level guys that have a really hard time doing that. And while GSP is still elite as far as skill and experience, like I said, he hasn't. I'd say Woodley would probably be, if not the fastest guy, no worse than the second fastest guy he's faced. And I don't know who's faster and more explosive than him. I'm just giving Woodley's athleticism and his initial intelligence and game planning the proper respect, because it deserves that. He's not a stupid guy. He didn't just hit Lawler with wild punches. He feinted him, and then Lawler ate it. He took full advantage of his skill set and his physical skill set with some technical game planning, and he walked Lawler into a shot and finished him. It wasn't a luck. It wasn't stupid pressure or aggression or wild punches. It was precision. It was game plan. It was strategized, and he maximized it based off his abilities. And he could do that to GSP. But if he doesn't, then all those other things come into factor. But initially, right off that first round and a half, we can't pretend like Woodley's not a handful for anybody.
Yeah, I can definitely get with you on that there. Let's stick on Diaz though, because now he's making his way back into the sport. He just signed a new deal with the UFC. I saw something out the blue today that there's talks. There's always these rumors and stuff like that you'll find, especially in combat sports. But there's talks about a potential fight between Diaz and Chael Sonnen. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I would watch that, and I would watch it under the right circumstances, because this is purely entertainment here. This fight has nothing to do with any rankings at all. It has nothing to do with any title implications. But this fight is all about getting eyes on the product. And I think if placed in the right position, I would love to see it as a co-main event to someone of a lesser champion, like maybe a Demetrius Johnson or something like that. Let them be featured that night. But this as a co-main event, I would definitely sit down and watch it. I would enjoy it. I would enjoy the fight promotion beforehand too, because it would be out of control. But what are your thoughts about that? Is that something you would watch? And who do you want to see Diaz fight when he comes back?
I'm always stuck when I think about fights. You want to see I always ask people, do you want to see important fights or do you want to see good fights? Because every time you have elite guys fighting, it's not always an exciting, back and forth, memorable fight. A lot of fights are one-sided. A lot of them are just where two guys cancel them out. I think a lot of times you have to have just good, exciting fights to buffer when you have fights that don't pan out all the time. If you have sometimes name fighters don't take the chances and don't push the pace like they will against a guy they consider to be a lesser opponent. They'll take more chances. They'll fight a little bit harder. They'll fight a little bit more recklessly. So I wouldn't mind seeing an entertaining fight. I mean, the Sonnen Diaz fight, I probably favor Diaz. I don't know that Sonnen can go a hard 3 to 5 rounds wrestling anymore. Not with somebody with Nick Diaz cardio and his kind of chin and his kind of grappling. His submission game and guard game from the bottom is going to constantly force Sonnen to work and defend and to reset control. And if they get on the feet, Diaz will just chop him up with volume, I think. I mean, and as far as that fight goes, think about the Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz fight. What did that prove? Nothing. It was entertaining. It wasn't even the best fight. It was just entertaining watching all the antics, the back and forth, and the brief bursts of action. A lot of people still talk about that fight just because of some of the antics that Nick Diaz had in the middle of the fight. So as long as if it's interesting and it can sell, I'll watch it. I mean, I enjoy seeing. I can take something of quality from any fight, whether it's technical, strategical, or just plain having fun watching it. As you do podcasts and stuff of this nature, you stop watching fights for fun and you watch them more to break them down and discuss them later on. So a fight like Diaz-Sonnen is just a fight I can kind of zone out at and just have fun with the antics Diaz is going to do and what Sonnen's going to do before, after, and during the fight. Me personally, I would like to see Diaz fight Gamebred. I said that last week. It'd just be an exciting fight. It'd be a lot of back and forth, showmanship, throwing up hands, probably flicking each other off, eating the shot, sticking your chin out, sticking your tongue out, playing to the crowd. It'd just be really exciting, and it would be a good fight based off technique, strategy, and physical ability. Both guys are in shape. Both guys are fairly competent in all areas. Both guys push a pace, and both guys like to stand up. So that'd be the perfect fight to bring him back. You don't need a name to sell Diaz. Diaz sells himself. All you need is a guy who's willing, and if you can have a guy who can talk a little bit and who's not afraid of him, who'll get in his face a little bit, that's all you need. That is all you need to make to maximize the Diaz brothers' their value to the UFC. You don't need like a classy guy who's a high skill guy. You need a guy who's gonna say, "F Nick Diaz, I'm gonna slap the out of him when I get in the cage." That's what you need. That's what sells. Because Nick isn't gonna take that. He's not gonna take it. And people are going to tune in to see him and that dude go back and forth and talk all sorts of trash. I mean, let's just be honest about it. That's the most entertaining thing about a Nick Diaz potential fight. Anytime he fights anybody, it's that pre-fight and post-fight conference. And what the hell is he going to say this time?
Yeah, I could definitely get behind a fight with Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz. I could get behind him fighting like Eric Silva, Matt Brown, any of those guys. I see those fights as fights he could definitely win and could help kind of like just get him back in a position to gauge interest. He hasn't won a fight since 2011, but he's still been a prominent figure in the sport, even especially with his brother and with the whole Free Nick Diaz campaign from last year. So he's someone who is always going to be up there, always going to be worth watching. So let's move on to the next topic about another legend in the sport. We got Dan Henderson, and I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to see his to listen to his interview on the MMA Hour on Monday, but yeah, it seems like he's done, man. It seems like he is talking in a way that leads you to believe that he's serious about retiring when he steps away from the sport. He was having a conversation talk about, he basically said he's ready to be finished, and I'm not too mad about that. I think it will be pretty interesting to see a couple things here. I wonder if he is really going to step away from the sport. Dan Henderson's kind of that guy who everyone thought would be around forever. After every time he fights, people hope that he does leave the sport, but it just doesn't happen that way. So obviously you have that storyline, and then you have him. He's been booked to fight Michael Bisping in London, England, in October for UFC 204. But what happens if he wins that fight? Does he get caught up in the opportunity to make millions of dollars with a rematch or with another fighter or something like that? Like, does he walk away and leave the belt vacated? What are your thoughts on Henderson and his potential retirement?
I've been a Henderson fan forever. I mean, he's a very, very well accomplished MMA guy. I mean, he won a UFC tournament, Pride title, Strikeforce titles. Only thing he hasn't won is a UFC title, and I think he's like what 0-2, 0-3 as a UFC title challenger, if I remember correctly, because he lost to Silva and then he lost to Rampage Jackson. So he hasn't fared too well at the UFC for titles, to be honest. But he's a legend, and he's a guy who's performed across multiple organizations in multiple countries and over an extended period of time. I mean, he's won fights. He's won fights in modern MMA, the middle of MMA's development, and the very early stages of MMA's development. I mean, you have to give the guy his credit and his props for pushing himself, having that kind of skill level, and most importantly, bringing some credibility, because he was an Olympic medalist, if I recall correctly, and a highly ranked wrestler, college wrestler. So he brought some credibility because he was a guy that the promoters would point to as like, look at this guy's accomplished. He's not some bar brawler. He's not some no-hoper. He's not some no-name guy with skills. He's a legitimate world-class athlete competing in our sport. And that brought some legitimacy to Pride, the UFC, and the Strikeforce. And anybody who claims differently is probably lying to themselves. As far as him retiring, I'm glad he retired. It would have been nice for him to retire off a win. I mean, everybody wants him to retire off a win. That's what you want for your legends. You want him to get that one big win and then get the hell out of Dodge. I'm going to be sad Peyton Manning's retiring, but guess what? Peyton Manning won a championship in his last go-round. So I'm like, don't come back another year, dude. Just leave it. Leave it. You won it. Get out. John Elway did the same thing. And if Dan Henderson somehow beats Michael Bisping, well, I won't say somehow because Bisping's chin is still shaky. It's still shaky. It's still not proven. If he hits him with the H-bomb, it is a short night for Bisping. If he hits Bisping, knocks him out, or God forbid, if he won by submission, which would shut down Twitter and the entire internet, he should just retire. Forget the money you're leaving on the table to fight. You walk away as the oldest champion. I think he'd probably be the oldest champion in MMA history. And you beat this guy with a knockout or submission or whatever. You take that, you leave the belt on the table, you vacate it, and you walk off as the middleweight champion. You retire as a middleweight champion. Only guy in history to do it. Oldest guy to win the championship. Technically speaking, to many people, an American hero. You don't risk any of that. You know how much money that will leave him moving forward on all his branding and all his gym and fighters coming to work with him. If he leaves on that kind of high note, he's proven everything he needs to prove to anybody else about his willingness to compete and his drive and his toughness and his heart and his danger, how dangerous he is as a fighter. I wouldn't do anything else. I'd take that belt, say, you know what, I'm retiring. It's up to you young guys now. Walk off and be perfect. And then he'd be the lineal champion, and everybody else who comes after him would be like, hey, yeah, you're the middleweight champion, but you didn't beat Dan Henderson. And if Chris Weidman wins the belt later on, Weidman can say, well, I'm a real champion. Hey, Weidman, you lost to Rockhold. Rockhold lost to Bisping, and Bisping lost to Hendo. So technically speaking, you were the real champion before, but you're no longer the lineal champion. You're a guy who won the belt after Henderson dropped it. And you can say you would have beat him. You can say whatever you want, but you didn't beat Rockhold, who lost to Bisping, and Bisping lost to Henderson. So everything you're saying from now on is speculation. Henderson's a champ. He walked off the champ. We're going to remember him as a champ. You're just the guy who picked up the belt after he left it.
Good points there. Good points there. So let's stay on talking about Dan Henderson there. And many people talk about him being one of the greatest of all time. Some will consider him the greatest American fighter of all time. Where do you see him ranked in your all-time list? You don't have to give him a number per se, but just talk about where you see him sitting amongst all the others.
It's hard not to put him near the top. I mean, it's hard not to put him in top 5. I mean, he's competed in almost every major organization, and he's won belts in almost every organization. He's challenged for belts in every organization. He's won belts in almost every organization except for the UFC. He's beaten ranked guys in every organization, and he's, just the length of his career alone justifies him having a high spot. I mean, he won a UFC tournament at welterweight. Like, how many guys can say they've actually fought in a major organization tournament? Most guys have never fought in a tournament in their lives. They'll never do it. Like, if you haven't gone to Japan to do it, hardly anybody can say you've won an MMA or a MMA tournament, like a legit high-level MMA tournament. And Dan Henderson can say that. And he can say he was the last Pride champion at 2 weights. And he can say, he's fought the best and he's knocked out the best, and he's been a top 10 contender for the majority of his entire career, which is almost 20 years. I mean, how do you even question that guy? He hasn't gotten busted for anything illegal, and to be quite honest, the majority of his losses have come in the past couple of years, and it's been as he's been on a steep decline. So a lot of that you can ignore and put off to the side. I mean, technically, I don't think he's anything special. Never had, never will. Strategically, I don't think he's anything special. Never had, never will. But as far as a guy who just goes out there and finds ways to win and puts on exciting fights and continually beats the best, the very best, if not the champions of every division he competes in, how can you even question him? I mean, what would you say? Where's the black mark on his record other than not having the UFC title? Where's the mark on his record that says that he's not elite or he's not one of the best guys of all time? Especially given how long he's competed and how high a level he has competed at almost his entire career.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate because there are some people that would say the reason why he's been able to compete at such a high level is because of the TRT usage that he was going through at one point of his career, which he made known. Like, he disclosed that publicly himself. So do you use that to detract from what he's done so far in his career? Like, is that enough of a reason to kind of pull back on him being the greatest ever, or
I can't detract on it because at that time it was legal to use. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like at one point, like the same thing what they do with the steroid stuff. I mean, like at some point it wasn't illegal to use them. So how am I going to fault a guy for using steroids when it wasn't against the rules to use steroids? You know what I mean? Like, I can't fault it because the time he was doing it, it didn't count against him. I mean, sorry, it's just a fact. It didn't count at that time. So I'm not going to use that against. I'm not going to use that against. People can consider it cheating, but at the time he was doing it, it was not cheating. So that's just their opinions that he was cheating all the time. He was maybe he was carried by TRT, but you were allowed to use it. That's like saying Floyd Mayweather didn't fight the best competition he could have fought, and that's not a fact. There's no way you can prove that to be a fact. That's just an opinion. Maybe an opinion that's supported by some facts, but it's just an opinion. And it was okay with the UFC. It was okay with MMA judges and you and everybody else. So who am I to point that out? Now after the fact it'd be a problem, but he hasn't gotten caught for anything since they said you can't do that. And more importantly, he's won fights since that's happened. So I'm not holding that against him. That's just being picky. That's just being picky for being picky's sake.
Yeah, good one there. Good breakdown and analysis there. I have I had one other Dan Henderson comment or question, but I don't remember now. It just kind of slipped my mind. So we're gonna go ahead.
I talk too much. I talk too damn much. Just tell me shut up.
No, I literally was just in my mind and it just faded to black. So let's talk about the third topic we have here, which we have a couple of different stories that have come out from MMA this past week. One of the more ridiculous ones was the comments that Conor McGregor made about pro wrestling. Both of us are WWE guys. That's how I got into the sport, into MMA as a whole. This is pretty funny to me because everyone from like Ric Flair responded to it, to current wrestlers today. It was pretty interesting to see. Would you, if it ever happened, would you watch Conor McGregor in a pro wrestling ring?
Man, pro wrestling, anybody who really, long story short, I know pro wrestlers, like legit pro wrestlers, like The Undertaker. I went to school with his niece. I went to college with his niece. Anybody who knows pro wrestlers knows that's a really hard business to be good at. It's hard to be a convincing, quality pro wrestler, and it's a hard way of life. I would not pay to see Conor McGregor, maybe for a match, maybe, but no, I wouldn't pay to see it. I don't think he'd be able to make it. It's a tough way to make a living. Anybody who knows anybody who knows anything about the sport and has been around anybody in the sport and seen the injuries and the damage and the workload those guys do, please, it might be safer to be an MMA fighter.
That's pretty interesting. That's a
And
pretty interesting look
just
there.
one thing, Ric Flair was right. Conor McGregor essentially stole his act and brought it into MMA. I mean, I'm not saying he's exactly like him, but he doesn't have the cadence. He's not as good a speaker as Ric Flair. But you can't tell me you don't see Conor McGregor sometimes. You're like, this dude has watched every Ric Flair interview in the world and just spun it with a little bit more of an Irish theme and a little bit more of an MMA theme. I mean, all he talks about is the money, the cars he drives, the checks he cashes, the bright lights, the limousines. I mean, Conor McGregor is like MMA's Ric Flair. He basically stole Ric Flair's whole act. Let's just be honest about it. Let's be honest.
I can definitely I will vouch for that. Like even the aviator glasses that he wears all the way down to that, he definitely did a pretty good job emulating probably the greatest of all time. Let's talk about, speaking of pro wrestling, that's actually a perfect segue that I just messed up there. Did you see the fight promo for CM Punk and his fight at UFC 203? I believe there's they're going to release a documentary about his transition from professional wrestling into the world of mixed martial arts. Did you see the trailer for the first episode?
Yeah, I saw a little bit of it. It was actually pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting. That's how they're going to have to sell it. They're going to have to make it about the transition and the journey and the courage and the development and the things he's given up and risking to do it to sell the fight, because it's not going to be sold on him being a potential long-term fighter or a very good one.
What do you think is going to happen, man? Like, he's fighting Mickey Gall, a guy with, very, very little professional experience, but obviously he's been training. He has amateur background as well. I'm almost flabbergasted by that this is really going to happen, because there's so many different things. There's so many different things that could happen. Does he get blown out the water? Does he go back to pro wrestling? What if he wins? Does that hurt the credibility of the sport? Like, there's so many different talking points that are going to occur leading into this weekend, leading into that weekend, leading into the fight. That, man, it's going to be amazing to watch. And I think that's the whole deal. It's going to be a spectacle that people stop and actually enjoy and actually watch, and then talk about it afterwards. There's going to be a lot of money to be made. I wouldn't be surprised if he does go back to pro wrestling when this is over and done. But before I talk about that, what are your thoughts? What do you think is going to go down on October 10th when UFC 203 gets here?
I have this sort of weird interest in this because you train, you grapple, right? So you grappled at a lot of gyms. I'm sure you grappled with pro fighters before, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah, as people who grapple with pro fighters, even regional or lower level pros, the difference between a pro who does this and been doing it for years and a person who just does it part-time or just started it, it's so dramatic. I'm I would like to see him do well, actually, put up a little bit of a fight. It's just so hard for me to fathom any sort of world where he wins this fight. Even against a guy who's not very experienced, that guy's had fights. That guy's been training continuously, probably for a longer period of time, most likely with a good camp. I think one of the Miller brothers is one of his coaches. So it's very hard for me to imagine him, outside of him just getting all shook up by the UFC lights and everything. It's hard for me to imagine any world where CM Punk wins this fight. It would just go against every common sense, logical aspect of how things are supposed to work. And if he wins it, it's just one of those really good feel-good stories, because, he is taking a chance, and he is doing something that a lot of people just don't have the courage to do. And some people just don't have an interest in fighting. A lot of people just don't have the guts to stick in there and risk being embarrassed, because losing a fight is a very personal. Losing a grappling match, losing a sparring match in front of people and getting really handled is very humbling, and it's personal on a level that losing a basketball game, losing a football game, losing any other sport just doesn't match. And and I would like to see him do well. I can't imagine him winning, but I would like to see him do well, and I like him to really kind of enjoy the experience and really feel like the training he did was really beneficial and put a good showing out for himself. Because I always feel bad for fighters who just get blown out, because it's just a horrible. I've never been a fighter, so I can't speak on that. But I've sparred in front of a lot of people and just gotten laced, and it was just, it's like soul crushing. It's bothersome. So I would like to see him do well. I would like to see him perform well. I just don't know how he wins this. And if he does, what does that do for the guy who's actually a legitimate fighter? What kind of hit does that do to his career? You lost to a guy who's never fought before, a 30-something-year-old retired pro wrestler? I mean, what does that do to his legitimacy? I mean, it's a dangerous fight for him. Punk loses, he's supposed to lose, and he's supposed to lose in devastating fashion. If he wins, this other guy is never going to hear the end of it. I mean, never, ever in his life will he hear the end of this. You're the guy who got submitted by the pro wrestler, knocked out by the pro wrestler? Man, I'm just interested in seeing it. I'm really interested in just seeing what happens. That's all I can say. I wish I had a technical aspect of it, but I'm just interested in the whole storyline of it and what it means on both sides. I mean, like I said, CM Punk's good if he loses or wins. I just want him to put up a good fight if he loses. But if this other guy loses, hell, if this other guy even gets put in a dangerous position by CM Punk, it's problems for his career, because that's not a good look, dude. It's like me going in and sparring a guy who fights in the UFC and me lighting him up on the feet. There's no excuse for that. And I'm not trying to insult myself, but I shouldn't be going into any MMA pro practice and handling people. And if I am, those guys need to do some work. It's just a fact.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of fallout that night. Comparable, and it's interesting because people try to compare it to Brock Lesnar. Obviously, he doesn't have that background that Brock had coming into the cage, but there's going to be so many different talking points about that event and what happens after the fact. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in seeing it from that point of view as well. It's going to be something worth watching, and I'm interested to see again what happens after the fact. Where does he go? Does he stay in MMA? Does he go back to pro wrestling? 'Cause, man, if he goes back to pro wrestling, there's so much money for him there too. So there's a lot of different talking points there for us to consider. So it's going to be a story worth watching.
Why did he leave pro wrestling again? I'm sorry, I never even figured out why he left in the first place.
Basically, a major fallout with the McMahon family and with the WWE, with how he was being treated, how he perceived himself to be treated during the end. And, it's a common story that happens with a lot of fighters, a lot of pro wrestlers that you see, they don't have the greatest exit. So that's the easy explanation.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just kind of curious. I'm like, wasn't he? I kind of lost track for a little while, and I was like, wasn't he one of their biggest stars? Like, why did he stop wrestling to go do this of all things?
Yeah, he certainly was their biggest star for a long while, and he would come back. If he came back, he would still be one of their biggest stars. So that's what I think. I would not be surprised if he walked back into the WWE and basically got back right off to where he wanted from the get go. Let me see. Let me look at one other story I wanted to cover real quick. One other story really quickly there. So actually, yeah. So we are in the middle of the Olympics this year. I'm not sure if you're watching the summer events, but judo just went down. I don't know if you saw the big Travis Stevens win from yesterday, but wrestling is set to start in a couple of days. So are you following the Olympics at all? Do they have any appeal to you as a mixed martial artist fans?
I watch them just because, like, I've always been into martial arts. My dad is a black belt in judo. I'm into boxing, so of course I always pay attention. Wrestling is something in the past couple years, I've really started getting into and appreciating. Judo, of course, has been, like I said before, my dad was in it, and I got my start in grappling, learning kind of judo for MMA is like no-gi judo, where you modify the trips and the throws and the pins and the stuff of that nature. So I've been watching it. I haven't been, it's not like my favorite thing to do, but I just like seeing the competition. I like the storylines because unlike every other sport, even the people who compete at a high level, it's weird. It's very fascinating to me that somebody competes in the Olympics because essentially if you lose, you have to wait 4 more years, and then you have to qualify 4 years later. You have to compete at a high enough level to be considered, and then still qualify to make a team to compete again 4 years later. So you don't get another shot right away. You might beat somebody in a world championship. You might beat them in a European championship. But if that person wins that Olympic match, then they'll always have that over you, and you have to fight very hard to get that opportunity again. So the whole concept of the Olympics is very, it's just very interesting to me. You really have a lot of people don't come back to compete at that level. You have one shot. Like in the NBA, you have one shot at the title. You might not be back. Every year you play in the league, you have a shot. In the NFL, every year you play in the league, you have a shot. Even in combat sports, you could luck out, just like Michael Bisping did, and end up in a title fight. Olympics? Nah, dude, it's once every 4 years. And more than likely, you're only going to get one shot at it. So if you don't make it, you have to take joy in being an Olympian and go home and just try to live the rest of your life. And it's also fascinating to me that being an Olympian, you're probably one of the top 2% of athletes in the world. Like, you're the best of the best of the best. And even though you're at this level, it's so hyper competitive that that's not even a consolation prize when you lose. It's like, yeah, I was in the top 2%, but it doesn't matter. I didn't get a medal, or I got a bronze medal, or I got a silver. I mean, that sort of competition and that sort of focus is just crazy to me. I mean, I'd be happy to be an Olympian, but I guess that's why I never could be one. Obviously, I don't have the talent. I clearly don't have the drive to look at it like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to kind of break it down. I always find it interesting to listen to the stories from the multiple-time Olympians that have been there, time after, like Michael Phelps, for example, who's been there time after time after time, and see what keeps them motivated to keep doing it and to keep coming back. I'm certainly interested. I was excited with the judo performances this past week. I'm looking forward to wrestling, which starts on Sunday. There's going to be a lot of good matches. Jordan Burroughs doesn't go until later on in the week, so we're going to see what happens there.
I also like the fact that judo's getting so much attention because, when MMA came around, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu got so much attention and everything. It's like the grappling version of boxing. Like, boxing used to get no respect in MMA until people really understood it. You started seeing people who know how to box get into MMA. Not like, obviously, world champions, but guys who trained with them and have legitimate boxing backgrounds. Now people appreciate it. Like, most people, they've rolled with a lot of high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. A lot of people I know haven't worked with a lot of really good judoka. They have no idea like how strong, how fast, how dynamic those guys are. Like, those dudes get their hands on you, you're going in the air. Like, you see the Olympic level guys, the national level guys fighting for position, trips and takedowns. That's against other high level judoka. If you're like a regular person or a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu person, there's no struggle. You're getting thrown, and you're getting thrown with a quickness. So I'm glad to see people understanding and appreciating the value of judo and the athleticism and the skill it takes. It's finally getting a little bit of shine. I guess Ronda Rousey helped it some earlier on in MMA, but just have the nation really appreciate the art and everything that comes with it. That's one thing I'm very appreciative of.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine who is married with, she's a mother of two, and she was talking about coming to the gym where I train and teach because she was watching judo yesterday, and she actually got into watching judo because of Ronda Rousey. So, like, you're 100% right. Like, it is slowly kind of helping people get ingrained into the sport, and I definitely appreciate that. So this is a good time to be a martial artist in general because there's a lot of growth within the sport, but being an Olympic year, there's going to be a lot more eyes on the sport as a whole. I don't know how I feel if jiu-jitsu ever became an Olympic sport, but that's neither here nor there. let's take some questions that we have gotten from this week. The first one harkens back to Tyron Woodley, where I was asked what makes someone a contender versus what does not make someone a contender. For example, why is Stephen Thompson the number one ranked fighter right now, and why should he be considered the number one contender as opposed to someone like a George St. Pierre who's been away, or like why is Ronda Rousey promised a shot at the belt if she returns back to MMA as opposed to someone who's been doing it and winning for so long. So like what kind of criteria do you look at when considering someone an actual top contender?
Well, as a person, and you're a real. I hate to say this because it's insulting to MMA fans, but it's true. You're a real sports fan. Like, you pay attention to other sports. I'm a real sports fan. I pay attention to other sports. MMA is like, it's a sport, but it's kind of like the WWE because it's sports entertainment. They don't go by a list of rules and criteria for people to get title shots. I mean, people like Carlos Condon got one for some reason. What did he do to get one? Like, you have people on 8-fight winning streaks. They can't get a title fight. Somebody else who lost or got KO'd or finished in their last fight gets. I mean, Miesha Tate got like another shot at Ronda Rousey, and she lost the fight to Kat Zingano. Like, what? How does that even make any sense? It makes no sense. I mean, as far as like legitimate criteria, it's quality, it's level of opposition you beat, how you beat them, because beating someone in a dominant 5-round decision matters, or if you blow their doors off, that's impressive too. So how you win matters, who you win against matters, and how many fights have you won matters. That's usually what I would go by as far as criteria, because that's what it goes by in actual legitimate sports with actual legitimate rankings and actual legitimate matchmaking, none of which the UFC has. They just make these ridiculous matches, and they have these ridiculous people coming in for title shots because it makes money. Chael Sonnen had a title shot. Based off of what? What did he do at light heavyweight to get one? Ronda Rousey is promised one. Based off of what? Getting her doors blown off by Holly Holm, who then got submitted by Miesha Tate, who then got beat, who got outclassed for 4.5 rounds by Valentina. Like, it just makes no sense. Whoever allows them to fill a card, whoever has an interesting story, it might be an interesting matchup, and whoever will draw the most eyes and sell the most pay-per-views is how the UFC does matchmaking. I mean, no offense, when Gilbert Melendez came back, he fought Edson Barboza. Why is Edson Barboza fighting Gilbert Melendez? Gilbert Melendez hasn't fought in a year, and he lost his last fight. And Barboza had won his last fight, or won his last 2 fights, and now he's fighting a guy who lost his last fight and was suspended for a year? What sense does that make? Junior Dos Santos fighting Ben Rothwell? Junior Dos Santos had got like mollywops. He'd been getting beat senseless. And sure, he beat Rothwell, but why was Rothwell, a guy who was in the top 3, fighting Junior Dos Santos for any reason at all? Like, it just makes no sense. It's all entertainment. It's all potential money or exciting fight matchup. That's how the UFC does it. But in actual real life, it should be based off how many ranked opponents you beat, how many wins you've had, and how dominantly or impressively you won. That's my criteria.
Good, some good breakdowns there. Good breakdowns. The next question is pretty interesting. Who is your most overrated and underrated fighter on the UFC roster right now?
Oh wow, that is a tough one. Oh, I mean, overrated is so harsh. I mean, like, who's really overrated though? Oh man, I got a overrated guy. I will probably have to say it can't be anybody lightweight. Lightweight's just so good. Can't be I'd probably say maybe overrated, and he's still very good. Maybe like a Luke Rockhold or a Chris Weidman. I mean, like, both guys. Luke Rockhold is a very good fighter, but I think people ignore certain holes and mistakes he makes because he's such an athletic, dynamic guy. I mean, he's a good striker. He's not the greatest. He's not the most technical. And I got exposed against Michael Bisping to the world, but I had known about it for a while. You know what? No, Ronda Rousey would have been the most overrated, but she's already been exposed. I'll have to say Yeah, somebody like Weidman or Rockhold, they're very good fighters, but I was never convinced that either one of them was just the creme de la creme, the best all-around guy technically, athletically. Athletically, I was never impressed with Weidman. I thought he was kind of one-dimensional athletically, a big, strong, tough guy, not very fast, not very dynamic, and not a really great striker. I thought he won the title by beating up on a lot of lesser guys. I mean, Damian Maia isn't a real middleweight. He doesn't fight at middleweight anymore. Mark Muniz, he was really awful in the UFC, to be quite honest. He beat up on a lot of guys who were faded and old and on decline, and people were considering him pound for pound, and I was just never really impressed with him. It'd probably be him, probably be someone like him, or TJ Dillashaw. I mean, Dillashaw's really good too, but I think he's a guy who's a little bit overrated, especially with regards to his striking. But yeah, probably something like that. That's the best guy I could think of. As far as underrated, I'd probably say Demetrius Johnson. He's not underrated by hardcores, but people just think he's like some little tiny man who the average guy who a 180-pound untrained guy would just slap around it, and they don't understand the level of craft and dedication and intelligence and repetition he has in developing the game he has. Like, he is so far ahead of the curve, it's borderline embarrassing how much better he is than everybody in his division. And he could be at 135 and probably be no worse than the second best or third best guy in the division. The only difference, the size thing would play a factor. He's criminally underrated. He's underrated across the board by his opponents. He's underrated by the casual MMA fans. He's underrated by some hardcore fans who just say he's boring, which just shows you they don't know anything about the finer points of the game. For you to say that he's just outright boring and terrible and not interesting to watch, I've never seen it. Even a fight where he's dominating, I've never seen a fight he's had where I have not been interested on some level, where he hasn't had a massive rewatch value as a person who is a true fan of MMA. So probably he's the most underrated, and somebody like Weidman or Rockhold is overrated. Not saying they're not bad. They're very good fighters. I'm not saying they're not very good fighters. I'm not saying they're not top fighters. I'm saying that people sold them to me as something that they're not. And I've known people who kind of sparred and trained with both of them in certain key areas. Like Chris Weidman's not a world-class wrestler. They keep saying he is, but he is not a world-class wrestler. And Rockhold's not a world-class striker, even though they keep touting him as a world-class striker. Certain things like that, they just sell people. They use to sell, they use to market them, and neither one of those guys is as good as they've been advertised to a certain degree, in my opinion. I'm not saying they're terrible, but I think they get pushed a little bit harder than their record says they should be. And that's probably going to be a really unpopular statement for me to make, but probably more so in the case of Weidman than Rockhold, but definitely like probably one of those two.
That's interesting. That's some very different picks there. I definitely can agree with you on. I can get with you on both of those, especially with Demetrius Johnson being underrated. You know, he's might be fighting at 125, but he would give a lot of people that work real quick. So you know, he's someone that I enjoy fighting. Someone I definitely appreciate everything that they do for the sport. Last question we have for tonight. Marlon Moraes is a free agent. Where does he go? You know, this is an interesting question that came up, you know, because everyone just assumes that he's going to jump to the UFC and make that run there. But his last fight for the World Series of Fighting, he got paid 90 and 90. He's not going to get that from the UFC, not for a first fight. So where do you see him going? And where do you think he lands for his next contract?
After hearing the interview by Mark Henry, his coach, and you know, I understand the spirit of the sport, facing the best and wanting to know if you're the best. I get that completely, but I think Marlon is much like a Woodley in instance. He's looking out for the bottom line. Would he like to fight the best? Yeah, but I'm not fighting the best at a pay cut. I'm not going to make $180,000 to fight in World Series of Fighting, and I've been accustomed to making this kind of money, and then you're going to give me a 25, 35, 45% cut. It's not happening. I mean, and there is no way the UFC signs him at that price. If they do, I will be beyond shocked. It will be the biggest upset in MMA to me, that a guy who's essentially proved nothing against elite guys is going to come in and get paid 90 and 90. Well, he'll probably want more than that. To fight in the UFC, he'll probably want something like 110 and 110. I mean, they have like proven guys. That's like Sage Northcutt money. And I don't know that Marlon's has any sort of appeal as far as like across the board, has multimedia appeal like Northcutt does. I don't know that he's that kind of guy. So if he ever gets that contract from the UFC, I'll consider that the biggest upset because he would have essentially have beaten the UFC straight up by getting a contract that nothing in his other than potential and athletic ability says he deserves. That's the only thing that says he deserves that kind of money is athletic ability and potential. Nothing he's done says he deserves that kind of money. Eddie Alvarez deserved what they paid him. I get that. Conor McGregor worked to the point where they deserve where they pay him. Sage Northcutt, he's in the media. He's all over the news. He's been a guy who reaches across different elements of sports and media. So I understand why he might get some more money. But Marlon, I can't see it. And I would, if I was him, I wouldn't take the pay cut. To fight the best, you want me to fight the best, you got to pay me more than I made at the World Series of Fighting. And the UFC isn't going to do it. So he's not going anywhere. They'll just have to pay more, bring more guys in for him to fight. And I wouldn't blame him for not fighting either. Anybody with common sense wouldn't. Would you take that kind of? Would you take a pay cut? I wouldn't.
Nope.
Not especially if I have kids and a wife. If he's willing to take it, I guarantee you his wife isn't going to let him. Are you crazy? Nah, dude. Can't happen. Can't happen. Before you sign that contract with the UFC, you sign that contract with me, buddy. You ain't taking a pay cut.
Wow, yeah. No one's taking that type of pay cut. So we're gonna bring this episode to a close. We have a non-fight weekend ahead of us. So I'm definitely gonna enjoy my time off. You should as well. Let everybody know where they can catch your content throughout every day of the week.
I've been really meaning to actually get something done on the site. I've just been getting on. I'll be straight with y'all. I've been sparring myself, and then I've also had a couple amateur fighters who've been sending me video they're sparring at. Some of their coaches have been asking me for questions and trying to get my insight or something on it. So I haven't had any time to really do anything except occasionally get on Twitter and go on some rants or do some breakdowns on some strategies or approaches or have some conversations with other analysts. Patrick Wyman is a great follow on Twitter. We have like incredible discussions online regarding strategy, technique, and fighters. Connor Rebush, he might have been the guy you read who predicted the fight for Woodley. He writes for SureDog, and he's on Twitter as well. They're Bloody Elbow. Yeah, they're on Bloody Elbow too, so you should know these guys. So people can find me on Twitter anytime. Like I said, ask me a question. People ask me questions. People ask for my picks on fights. People ask me to explain what happened in certain fights, and I'm always happy to have that discussion. If you can't find me anywhere else, you will always find me on Twitter, if not this show. And like I said, I'm always welcome to have those discussions because I enjoy it. I like analyzing things. I like breaking it down. I like learning from people. And no matter whether I feel I'm right or I educate somebody, I'm still educating myself by having that discussion. So I appreciate any and all questions, any and all interactions on Twitter as it pertains to MMA or combat sports in general. Like, that's
What's
what I'm.
The Twitter handle?
Oh yeah, sorry. Black Jordan Green at Schwan Humes. Am I saying that backwards? Yeah. Just put in Schwan Humes or Black Jordan Green. I'll pull up. Not the white
And
Jordan. We're cool, but sometimes we have beef because he might have been mad because I stole his name technically. But other than that, me and him are pretty cool. So yeah, the Black Jordan Green.
Yeah, we gotta tell that story one day. But you can always find me at R Garcia. You can find me at @R_Garcia_sports. Writing for a lot of websites: Bloody Elbow, MMA Ratings, Fansided, NFL Spin Zone, everything. So you can always catch my content out there. You can catch me talking about sports always on Twitter. So just check me out there.
You were super busy, man. Do you ever sleep? You're teaching, you're training, you're working different sports. Man, I'm happy. I'm happy
if I get 5 to 6 hours a day, man. If I can get 5 to 6 hours a night, I'm happy.
See, this is why people should listen to you because you've dedicated yourself to covering it, to analyzing it, to getting it out to the public, and most importantly, as far as legitimacy as a martial artist, teaching and training it. Most guys don't cover all those bases. They do one or the other. You're doing all of them. So you got my respect. If nothing else, you have my respect on that.
I can definitely appreciate you there, man. I can definitely appreciate your support there. So let's go ahead and close the show out. You can find us back here next Wednesday to talk about the world. We'll probably have some more news. I'm sure we will. But you can catch us next weekend on the MMA Ratings Podcast. Have a great day, everybody.